Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The Saudis have Jared Anderson amongst their fighters that they're looking to keep pushing as they look to have more cards in the United States as part of their Riyadh season boxing cards. So you can see here, this was a tweet from Turki Alalshikh. So you have him saying that they're looking to prioritise cards for the US market, bigger fights, and especially for the likes of Terence Crawford. And amongst that he will be supporting names a number of US fighters. And as you can see, Jared Anderson, his name is mentioned there. And I know for some they'll be thinking, why are they looking to keep Anderson in the limelight? I mean, I think the better question is why not? I've seen some people who were really, dismissing Anderson after his loss to Martin Bakole, calling him a hype job, saying that he was no good, never been any good, carefully matched, all this sort of stuff. But I would say a guy at 24 years old who's had wins over the likes of Charles Martin, Jerry Forrest, Riyadh Murhi, those are his wins of late. There's a lot to like about Anderson, the skill set and what he could potentially do. But we have to also recognise after that loss to Martin Bakole, which was always a dangerous fight. I don't know why people were just saying it wasn't. This was always a very tough fight. And right when it was announced, a lot of us were saying, could this be too much too soon? And so it proved. Maybe he will never be good enough to beat the likes of Martin Bakole. But just because he couldn't beat the heavy-hitting Bakole doesn't mean he can't be in other good matchups. And as we know, styles make fights. So there are some matchups that I think that they can readily make for Anderson as he makes his way back after that first loss. I don't think we should be writing this guy off at all. But he is going to have to go away, do some stuff in his training, make some improvements, and also with some of the out-of-the-ring issues that he's had in the past year or two, he's going to have to evaluate how badly does he want this, because the air of arrogance and overconfidence didn't serve him well ultimately in that fight with Bakole. He seemed to have his tactics all mixed up, thought he could bang with Bakole and knock him out. It was always going to be more of a Michael Hunter style versus Martin Bakole that was always going to have more success. In and out, looking to be elusive. And he certainly has pretty much all the tools if he wants to implement that sort of game plan. And I'm sure that they're going to be looking at what he needs to do going forward. Who should be in his corner, what sort of training, what sort of improvements they can make, especially in his defense. Martin Bakole caught him a lot of times with that uppercut, and Anderson himself admitted after the fight that he was caught too easily and making some of the mistakes that he's been prone to in the past. As we saw against Charles Martin, he got rocked, and that should have been a little bit of a wake-up call. So the loss for Anderson, and I discussed this more in depth in a video on Patreon, potentially could be the making of him, but it's up to him if he's going to dedicate himself, and he's going to have some good people around him to really sort of make things work and help pull him up from this loss. But I think there are fights out there for him, and fights that he can be in, be competitive in, and potentially win against some of the biggest names in the American heavyweight market. There was talk that you could have had Jermaine Franklin versus Jared Anderson instead of the Bakole fight. But ultimately they opted for the Bakole fight. Maybe it was for money, or they thought that they could take out Bakole. I mean, one of the things I was surprised about after the fight was a lot of people, and some coming into the comment section of my video, saying they'd never heard of Martin Bakole. That was shocking to me, but I guess following the division so closely, some of those guys, they're in the Who Needs Some club for a reason, because Bakole is dangerous, and no one really wanted that sort of high risk, potentially low reward. But with the Saudis throwing money out, making matchups possible, then obviously the reward lifts, and the potential, risk versus reward equation is different, and they took that fight. But another name that was potentially in the mix, which they didn't choose, was Jermaine Franklin. That could be a perfect fight to go into right now. You have Jermaine Franklin putting up some respectable performances against Anthony Joshua, against Dillian White. He's shown his durability, and I think one of the things that Anderson needs is guys that are going to make him work, going to give him rounds, and he needs to be able to be a bit more pinpoint, trying to break guys down rather than trying to just take guys out. Another potential name is Michael Hunter. And some people might think, oh, that's an outrageous name to throw out there. But when you consider a couple of things, I think it's more realistic than you may think. You have the likes of Michael Hunter having been pretty much nowhere in recent years. He made certain decisions, him and his management walked away from the IBF mandatory a few years ago, kind of been in a little bit of purgatory since. And you can't forget when he went to Triller on that deal, that 2-fight deal, and he fought Jerry Forrest and he escaped with a draw. He didn't win that fight. He was lucky to get away with a draw in that one. But people forget, Jerry Forrest was taken out by Jared Anderson. More recently, you've had Michael Hunter against Cassius Chaney, who didn't throw any punches. Hunter looked decent in that one, but it was hard to know how good the performance was because Chaney was so bad and just wasn't firing anything back. Prior to that, there was also an exhibition that Hunter was in, and he lost that fight. So you do have a situation that Michael Hunter, who's looking for a big fight, he's calling for Martin Bakole. Martin Bakole mentioned his name, but maybe Bacole's team won't ultimately go that direction. I think Hunter versus Anderson is a pretty likely matchup. And when you consider as well, Andy Ruiz Jr., and then you also have Jarrell Miller, they were on that same card. It wasn't a great performance from either. It looks like Miller is very conscious of his gas at this point of his career, how much energy he can expend to go the distance. And you have Ruiz, who had 4 rounds in him and ultimately, fought tied the rest of the fight. People are saying that Ruiz, if he hadn't hurt his right hand, he wasn't throwing the left hand. So, I'm not really buying that excuse. Ruiz hasn't lived a life, been inactive, and it showed in that fight. That caught up with him, his non-dedication to the sport. If you put Jared Anderson with both those guys, those are good fights. And obviously for Miller, you can sort of have that fight positioned in a marketing sense as the big baby versus the big baby for who is the real big baby. So I like that the Saudis are still backing Anderson. One loss doesn't necessarily define your career. Anderson could still come back, have some very good wins, and ultimately still achieve his goal in the sport of becoming a champion. But potentially he may have to revisit those timelines that he was talking about a year or two, that he wanted to retire by the time he was 26 or 27. He's just put himself one peg back in the queue after this loss. You're only ever a couple of big fights at this level away from a title shot, but he would need to have some meaningful fights to get there. And he needs to get some meaningful rounds. His seasoning is not quite done. He needs to have a hard 12-rounder against the likes of Jermaine Franklin, who might not be able to hit nearly as hard as Martin Bakole, but he's going to work hard, he's going to be hard to break down, and he will be also letting his shots go as well. Anderson should not be written off at this point. What do you make of this? The Saudis looking to continue to back him. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.